Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're jumping back into our ongoing retrospective look at Spawn with Spawn number 38. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in December of 1995, we see a wonderful cover by Tony Daniel and Kevin Conrad, featuring a small elderly man with a very large cybernetic gorilla behind him, who we were told leading into this issue was going to be named Apex, spelled APE''X, as in Ape X, which is a moronic name, and thank God they changed it to something far cooler, as we're going to find out when we get further into this book. Story: Todd McFarlane, Julia Simmons. Pencils: Tony Daniel. Inks: Kevin Conrad. Letters: Tom Orzechowski. Color: Todd Broker. Computer color assist: Roy Young. The story starts out with a security guard sitting by his lonesome in a guardhouse, smoking a pipe, reading a book, as he sees a vehicle approaching in the night. He's actually rather surprised to see this, in the fact that he's expecting no visitors to the property that he's guarding, and believes that this is just another person who was lost, confused by a road sign, and believing that they were on their way to a motel, as he steps out of the guardhouse to tell them they've gone the wrong way. The man steps out of his vehicle and tells the guard that the professor is expecting him. However, the guard tells him that there's no record of anyone who's supposed to be here this evening, and asks for ID. He then states that the identification is expired and that the man will have to return tomorrow. However, the man states that won't be necessary, as he grabs the guard and snaps his neck, killing him instantly. He then gets back into his Jeep and drives toward Dracula's castle, apparently, because no professor can just live in a normal house. It always has to be some ridiculous medieval castle, even though this is supposed to be in America, and places like this are few and far between in America. As he steps through the doors of the estate, he realizes that everything seems abandoned and filthy, and there's cobwebs and dust everywhere. There's books strewn all about. And he's kind of shocked when he sees this and believes that no one would be living in this mess, especially a professor. He then decides to go about his work as he starts looking for clues, passing by machinery that looks as though it hasn't been operational in quite some time. And he finally comes across a light coming from a doorway that is cracked open, as he pulls his gun out of his trench coat and prepares to perhaps encounter some sort of resistance. I'd also like to point out that this guy's trench coat makes no sense. You'll notice here it kind of trailing off a little bit here in the distance, but then it gets even longer when he attacks the guard, and then when he enters in through the doors of the estate, it just flares out with a huge gust of wind. And I get it, it's supposed to look cool, and it does, don't get me wrong, the stylization here is undeniable. However, what's also undeniable is the fact that a trench coat, one, should not be able to change its length the same way that Spawn's cape does, and even if it wasn't changing its length, if it were this long normally, you can see here, it actually flares out up above the height of his head, meaning that this trench coat would trail several feet behind him as he walked. Again, I'm not trying to take a dump on Tony Daniel's artwork, because I do like it, but I think he was just kind of getting a little bit too overboard with the stylization of this guy's coat. The man, whose name we learn is actually Chris, enters the room to discover that there's no one in this room either. However, he does happen to find a bookshelf that contains a large number of VHS cassette tapes. These tapes all have a similar label on the side, each one of them stating Anna with a corresponding year. And these tapes don't seem to be anything that would be something that his employers are interested in, and it's not really what he was sent here to find. So he decides to take a chance on playing the tape that is already in the VCR as he presses play. Meanwhile, back in New York City, we come across Spawn, who is in the alleyways desperately and frantically digging through all the trash to try and locate all of the weapons that he stashed here months prior. Also, I'd like to point this out, and I don't know how well it's showing up on camera, but this panel down here, Tony Daniel actually drew this incorrectly. The placard right here that is attached to the television is drawn to give the perspective that it is jutting outward from the bottom right up to the top left, whereas the buttons that are supposed to be the controls for the VHS function of this television are drawn to appear as if they're jutting outward from the top left going down towards the bottom right, which is a problem because now it's two completely contradictory perspectives on the exact same plane. Again, I know I'm nitpicking, but this messed with me so bad when I looked at it, and I couldn't figure out for a few seconds what was wrong until I really looked and saw what he had done. And I think it's also hilarious that Kevin Conrad just inked this with no mention of it. And part of me really hopes that the two of them did this on purpose just to infuriate readers like me who would be like going over this with a fine-tooth comb at some point. Spawn then decides that he's found all the weaponry he was looking for. As we see, he is armed to the teeth and begins trying to kind of like go through all the weapons, do a final check, make sure that they're all cleaned up and ready for action, as he starts using his cape to wipe the dust and debris away, making sure that the guns are going to function properly when he finally exacts his revenge on Jason Wynn, as we see him sitting upon his throne surrounded by his weapons, stating that he's just missing one thing. And this is when he's interrupted by none other than Cagliostro, who shows up with a load of ammo belts hanging over his arm, as he then asks Spawn, hey, what exactly is it that you're trying to accomplish here? I also find this hilarious as well. Again, one of those ideas where like Tony Daniel understands what guns are kind of supposed to look like, but has no concept of how exactly they work. We can see here that these two guns that Spawn is holding have the magazines all the way forward to where the end of the barrel would be, which means that when the round is loaded in, it has nowhere to travel to, which begs the question, if Spawn's holding the trigger and the handles of the gun right here, and the magazine is here, then what the hell is all the rest of this gun back here even for? Also, why is he holding it right-handed when all of the optics are clearly set up for left-handed use? And if all of these are fed by box magazines, then why do they also all need these ammo belts to feed into them as well? I get it. It's the whole rule of cool thing. Tony Daniel was trying to make really cool looking weapons without giving any actual thought to how they would function in any realistic manner whatsoever. Now, we did see that Chris was about to play the VHS tape that was in the VCR. However, it's stated as we return to the manor that he instead then decided to do a lap of the entire property to make sure that there was no one around before he watched the tape. Now, this is important to remember for later. As he begins the tape, he finds out that these are actually memoirs left by Dr. Frederick Wilhelm, who is talking about himself and the work that he was doing inside of this manor and in the lab. He explains that he was born into poverty and actually got his medical education during war in his European country, most likely World War II, although it's not specified. And it was during this conflict that he met the love of his life, his beloved wife, Anna, who he ended up marrying after the war. But she unfortunately had a few miscarriages then, and then also slipped into a very severe health crisis as she had some sort of unknown neurological disorder. And that he, as a doctor, did everything he could to try and save her. However, nothing seemed to work, and her health seemed to continue to decline to the point where he was having to basically give her like daily blood transfusions to keep her alive. And he became maniacally obsessed with trying to save his wife at any cost. As Dr. Wilhelm continued his very advanced neurological research, he eventually gained the interest of the US military, who decided that they wanted him to head up their cybernetic simian project. And while Dr. Wilhelm didn't really want to get involved in this, he realized that the money they were paying him was the only way he was going to be able to continue to fund the treatment for his very quickly deteriorating wife. And he was also forced to move her to America to continue the research. Unfortunately, this move had dire consequences for her health, and she eventually slipped into a coma. At this point, he realized that he needed to work quickly, but to no avail, as eventually his wife's heart stopped and there was nothing he could do to save her. However, he was able to preserve her mind in hopes that one day he would be able to figure something out that would allow him to either give her a new body or perhaps repair her own body and bring her back to him. This, however, was also interfering with his work that he was working on for the government, and he had to try and find a balance in giving the government what they wanted and meeting their deadlines, while also trying to figure out a way to bring his wife back from the dead. We then find out that the whole reason, and this is where there's kind of a giant plot hole in this story, that he was working on making a cybernetic ape had to do with the idea and the premise that all of the research that they had done previously to this in trying to introduce bionics into human beings had shown that human beings couldn't be enhanced cybernetically because they weren't able to deal with the physical pain involved in it. Unfortunately, this is completely disproven by the fact that Cyberforce exists in this universe. Keep in mind, in 1995, the image shared universe still existed, and Cyberforce was very much a thing, as was Super Patriot and all of the Gamorreans from Cybernary, who are all cybernetic beings, and humans who have bionic parts that are melded into their bodies, and they seem to operate with literally no problems. So this whole explanation of it had to be a gorilla because humans couldn't endure it makes no sense whatsoever. It all falls flat on its face. We then see that the doctor continues to work on his primate subject as he's doing everything he can to upgrade this gorilla, and has considered the possibility of being able to somehow transfer his wife's mind into a new body using this method. But it also causes the problem too, like he said before, that the human mind can't deal with the pain. So he then decides to instead try and introduce human characteristics into the simian mind to create more of an 80% human, 20% simian brain as a means of giving the government a cognizant and orderable soldier who's also enhanced through all these highly advanced cybernetics. Again, the story gets a little bit convoluted here, and the fact that it completely flies in the face of Cyberforce's existence just kind of makes it not make a whole lot of sense, unfortunately. We then see that Dr. Wilhelm continued his experimentation, trying to be more meticulous than ever and make sure that everything that he was discovering and logging was 100% accurate, as he wanted to make sure that it would absolutely work when he tried to bring his wife back. Unfortunately, he was also still having to deal with the government deadlines and having his budget cut constantly. This, however, only made him work more fanatically and feverishly to try and keep up the pace, as we see he then resorted to experimenting on cats as well. As Chris continues to watch this video, we find out that the doctor finally did make a breakthrough when Cy-Gor eventually moved on his own. Also, that's the name that Todd went with instead of Apex, which is a far better name. And also, this is the first appearance of Cy-Gor, if you hadn't guessed by now. And he realizes that now that this ape is able to live without life support and is able to move of its own free will, that he can now focus on trying to apply all of the things he's learned to bringing back his wife. And he just is worried that his days are growing short as he feels his health declining. As the tape comes to a stop, Chris gets up to turn off the television. However, it surges back on and shows the doctor in a very much different state, as he's barely able to move, and states that his left arm and his legs no longer work as he has suffered from a massive stroke, and it's taken him 4 days to claw his way back to the microphone and get the recording equipment back up and operational. and that he's afraid that he's going to die before he can resurrect his wife, and that also the beast is definitely now on the loose and he has no way of getting it back under control. As Chris continues to watch the video, there's a huge crack of thunder and a bolt of lightning, and the power goes off momentarily before the emergency generator can kick everything back on. Back in the alleyways, Cog asks Spawn exactly what he's getting up to, and Spawn states, "I've decided to go after Wynn because an acquaintance showed me how I can make a deal with my maker." Of course, this is in reference to the previous issue where he decided to take what the Freak had done and apply it to his own life, not realizing, of course, that the Freak was completely insane and that he was just kind of murdering people that had done nothing wrong to him, essentially. And Cog actually warns him of this, stating, do you really trust every freak you meet out there? And then at this point, Spawn gets a little bit angry with Cog, stating, you're the one who pointed me in Wynn's direction in the first place, and now you seem to be contradicting yourself. What gives? What is it that you're trying to do here? And Cog takes this moment to explain to him, your murder does not begin and end with Jason Wynn. There's a lot more going on than you realize. And that if you kill Wynn, you're not going to get the answers you're looking for, because he's really very valuable to you, and he's far more valuable alive than he is dead. However, Spawn's not too happy when he hears this. Meanwhile, a couple of homeless people who are living in the alleyways, a young girl and a large guy, are walking through as the girl is very excitedly telling her friend about this caped superhero who lives in the alleyways and sits on a throne and is able to pick up buildings and fly and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And she's like, "You're not going to believe it when you see it. He's like one of those comic book guys that we see, on television and read about." At this point, we move back to Spawn, who's checking the sights on his gun as he states that, Cog, I'm kind of tired of you, being so cryptic and all. Wynn's the one who gave the order to Chapel to have me murdered, which makes him number one on my list. And number two on my list is Terry, because he not only took my wife, he now betrayed me and is defending Wynn. Which brings up the idea that Spawn is actually very much planning on killing Terry Fitzgerald as he speaks to Cog during this issue. Cagliostro, however, remains still cryptic as he asks Spawn, "Did you ever wonder why you were put into the elite forces?" And Spawn states, "Well, it's simple. I saved the president's life." And Cog responds by stating, "You don't think that was a little bit too convenient?" At this point, Spawn's had enough and he states, "Listen, just say whatever it is you're going to say, because when you're done saying it, I'm still going to go after Wynn, and Wynn is still going to die." However, as he states going to die, this happens to be the point when the two homeless people come around the corner, and they're of course terrified to see Spawn pointing a gun in their direction, as they both put their hands up and beg for him not to shoot, as they then turn and run off into the darkness. Now, funnily enough, Spawn actually does feel somewhat bad about this, despite being angry and engaging in somewhat of an argument with Cagliostro, as he tries to stop them, stating, "Hey guys, okay, never mind, screw it," as they've already made it too far away for him to stop them. Getting back to the conversation between Spawn and Cagliostro, Spawn once again states, "What exactly are you getting at? How would there be any sort of secret agenda for me saving the president's life?" And Cog brings up the idea that the agenda was not for Spawn, aka Al Simmons at the time, to save the president's life. He wasn't at all supposed to stop that. The president was supposed to die. And that the forces that were behind organizing that assassination attempt were really caught off guard by the fact that he was able to thwart their plans, and that they had invested most likely years and untold amounts of money in trying to make that assassination happen and play out the way they wanted. And when Al Simmons stopped them from doing it, it completely threw a wrench in their plans. Unfortunately, because Al was now a national hero and had the spotlight on him, it also meant that they couldn't go after him and eliminate him. So the next best thing they could do was put him into a position where they knew where he was at all time and could dictate where he was going to be at all times to make sure that he couldn't interfere with their future plans. As Cagliostro turns and walks away, he then tells Al, listen, you can go and kill Wynn if you want to, but the reality is you have been a puppet ever since that day, and you're continuing to be a puppet even now, as you're playing into exactly what the Mabolja wants you to do. And if you want to stop being a puppet, it's time you started thinking for yourself and started acting on your own volition instead of playing into the hands of those around you. At this point, Chris decides that he has to explore the manor and find some of the doctor's research, as he's now convinced that the doctor has recorded most of his notes and also written down the rest of them in extreme detail. And he has to find something that discusses the extraction formula, which is apparently what he was looking for the whole time, although this is the first point at which it's actually been brought up exactly what he's trying to find. He then comes across a door, which he apparently didn't go into earlier, even though it stated that he had been through the entire manor trying to find if there was any living human here. As he shakily opens the door and enters, he is shocked to see the decaying corpse of Anna sitting in a chair, hooked to a jar that contains her still living brain that is, for some reason, attached by some wires to a helmet that her corpse is wearing. I don't know exactly why that would be necessary. Of course, Chris is shocked when he sees this, and he believes that Dr. Wilhelm was in fact some sort of psycho, as he turns and runs back down the stairs and runs past the room that still houses the running VCR and television. He happens to hear the doctor talking about how he fears this will be the last tape before the end, and that his Anna must be protected. It hasn't eaten, it will escape. He then says, if I die here, things will get worse. I haven't been able to reach it, and it will eventually get to my Anna. I have to kill it. It's been 3 weeks. I have nothing but compassion for whoever shows up here and finds this thing, because it will certainly be hungry. At this point, Chris starts to wonder exactly what it is he's talking about as he hits rewind. Unfortunately, once again, the power goes out. At this point, Chris decides that he's got to find some kind of information to take back to his superiors, and once again ventures out into the manor to try and discover where exactly the doctor has hidden his notes. Finally, Chris reaches what he believes he was looking for. Unfortunately, what he encounters is Cy-Gor, who has not eaten for weeks, and for the first time he encounters fresh meat. There's just one problem. Gorillas are not carnivorous at all. They eat almost exclusively plants and also a little bit of insects at times, but they don't eat meat. And apparently Todd either didn't know this or didn't care and thought that this would sound cooler when he wrote it down. Back in New York, we find Spawn going to the home of Grandma Blake once again and kind of seeking her comfort, as she welcomes him into the home and states that it's been some time since he's talked to her. He states he's been busy, and she actually accepts this immediately, stating, "Oh, I'm sure the Lord has got a great many things for you to do. Please come and sit down with me for a little while." And Spawn thanks her, stating that he is actually a bit tired. Granny Blake then asks Al if heaven is everything that she was told it was going to be, and he responds by stating, "I don't know, I haven't been there yet," which is not true. He actually did go to heaven in the Angela miniseries. For more information on that, you can check out my videos on that miniseries in my Spawn miniseries playlist. And he then tells her that an angel told him that her place in heaven was waiting and that she had honored God with her life. Granny Blake thanks him for his kind words and then states that she's sure he'll be there eventually, as that he was a true hero. However, Al refutes this by stating, "I was being used and I still am." He then asks, "What about Wanda? Is she okay?" And Granny tells him that Wanda was visited by a demon who tried to convince her that he in fact was Al. We of course know that this was Spawn when he went to Wanda and Terry's home after he had attacked Jason Wynn and seeing that Terry was also defending Wynn and believed he had been betrayed. Uh, Granny goes on to state that Wanda was very fearful and she wouldn't believe this evil demon, and that she still truly does love Al in her heart, and that Terry and her are both very scared and worried, and that they try to hide this from Granny Blake, but she can sense it whenever she's around them. And she then asks if there's anything Al can do to help them out to stop this evil man and keep him away from her beloved family. Upon realizing the terror that he's brought to Wanda and her family, Spawn realizes that he's made a grave error and says, "I'm trying," as we see him look very depressed as he puts his head down into his hand. And Granny states, "I'm sure you'll be able to help in any way you can. Here, I want to show you a picture of Wanda's daughter," as she walks across to the other room. And this really kind of is the point where I believe Spawn starts to realize that it isn't so much that Terry has betrayed him in any way. It's more so now that Terry is trying to do everything in his power to protect his wife and his child. And it's the same kind of thing that he would have done if he was in Terry's position. And he's starting to feel really guilty about all of the positions that he's put Terry and Wanda in throughout these past several months, of all of the dealings he's had between them and Jason Wynn and the Mavulja, and just all of the craziness that's been going on as we come to the conclusion of the story in this issue. We then get to the image info section. Nothing really special here, just goings on about what's happening in Image. There's a picture here of a lot of the people from Image at a costume party. Looks like they're having fun. I'm sure they did, but we're not going to get too deep into it. We then get to the spawning grounds, where readers could write in letters that would potentially be printed and answered or responded to by Todd McFarlane. The first letter, very interesting, by a man named Dean Andrew Shields from Columbus, Ohio. Now, I don't normally bring up the names of the people who wrote the letters or where they were from, but in this case, I wanted to do so because his letter starts out in the vein that he's afraid Spawn became too popular too quickly, and he's afraid that this will lead to it becoming a flash in the pan fad and have a negative effect on the longevity of the character. He then goes on to state that he doesn't want it to wind up like another property that he considers to be a fad and a completely flash in the pan type of thing, The Simpsons. Need I say more? That's a direct quote, by the way. That's the example he gave as the flash in the pan fad, The Simpsons, which even in 1995 had already been running for more than 100 episodes, and by the way, is still running as I record this video in 2025, 30 years later. It's the longest running sitcom in the history of television, and this guy was somehow calling it a flash in the pan fad, basically giving the impression that he considered it to be some sort of a failure. And that's why I stated his name. If by some miraculous chance he's still alive today at the age of 51 and happens to come across this video on YouTube and watch the whole thing through, I want him to understand exactly how dead wrong his take truly was in the letter that he wrote into this comic book. There's also another reader who brings up the things I stated about the Blood Feud miniseries not corresponding to the ongoing series of Spawn correctly, and it not matching up in the correct order. And Todd's explanation for this wasn't exactly very good. He basically just states that sometimes it's difficult to make sure that stuff's coming out at the right time, and it's like, not really. It just seems like Kevin Conrad and Tony Daniel probably got a little bit behind, and that messed up the release date on the Blood Feud miniseries. I'm just guessing. I don't know that for certain, but that seems like the most likely explanation. And there's another reader who, oddly enough, brings up the idea that he wanted to see Todd expand upon the relationship that Spawn had with Granny Blake a little bit more, and potentially utilize that as a way of guiding him and helping him through this like terrible string of events that have gone on in his life. And I just find it funny that he wrote that in a few months before this issue dropped, and the exact same thing that he wanted to happen happens in this issue, which is just kind of hilarious that he just, if he had waited like 2 more months, he wouldn't even needed to write that letter at all, and everything that he wanted to happen would have happened on its own. We then get a 2-page splash pinup by Chance Wolfe, and I think this is fantastic. It looks so cool. Great artwork. Spawn just looking super menacing with his hand glowing with necro energy, chains going wild, spikes galore, cape all flared out. We get bats flying around in the sky with him, the moon in the backdrop. Overall, I can't say enough good things about this pinup. I think it's absolutely wonderful. We then get to the end cap, which is the exact same end cap that was printed in issue number 37, so I'm not going to go over it again. It just talks about the upcoming spring lineup of McFarlane action figures with new Spawn, Sentinel, Dozer, and Future Spawn all being featured in the pages here. If you want to know my thoughts about it, you can check out what I said about it in my video on issue number 37. We then see 2 pages of the Spawn Direct mail-away service where you could order apparel such as hats and shirts, toys, trading cards, different sorts of Spawn memorabilia, probably the trade papers as well, I'm assuming. And you just had to do everything via mail-away back then because in 1995, the internet was nowhere close to what it is today, and buying things online was not at all normalized at this point in history. On the final page of the book, we get an advertisement once again for the Spawn board game. As I stated before, I've never seen one of these before. I would like to be able to get my hands on one. If I ever found one complete, I would absolutely buy it just to have in my collection and also to play it with some friends. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Spawn the video game on the Super Nintendo. If you've never played this game before, it is okay. It's not terrific, but it's playable. But it is difficult, really difficult, folks. It's not impossible to beat it, but you're going to be pulling your hair out by the end of the game if you ever decide to play it. Just be warned that you are in for a slog of a game, and you're going to be dying a lot and being really frustrated when you play this game just because of how hard it can be. And that was Spawn number 38. Overall, it was okay. There's nothing particularly wrong with the artwork. I love Tony Daniel and Kevin Conrad and their work that they put in together, both on this and the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries. I think they work well together. I think that, their work blends seamlessly with that of Todd's and Greg Capullo's. So it's not like jarring when you see the switch to their artwork from Todd and Greg's. And I like the design of Cy-Gor. I like the idea of what they were trying to do. But as I stated throughout the book, a lot of the stuff doesn't make sense. This whole concept of cybernetics being too painful for humans to endure, while Cyberforce is made up entirely of cybernetic human beings. And then we also have characters like Super Patriot and Savage Dragon and the Gamorreans in the Cybernary universe, which, by the way, was kind of done at this point because this was several years after Nick Manabat had unfortunately passed away at a very young age. So even if you want to remove that, fine, I'll give you that one. But still, we have characters within the Image universe who are 100% cybernetic human beings that don't seem to have any problem functioning or dealing with the so-called pain of having all these bionics integrated into their bodies. So I don't know why the reason that Todd came up with this whole idea for the origin of Cy-Gor. It could have just been that they hired this guy to come up with a race of mind-controlled guerrilla cyborgs to throw onto the battlefield, and it would have made way more sense. Then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may be that even though this flies in the face of Cyberforce's existence, that this explanation makes perfect sense and that Todd did nothing wrong in the writing. And if that's the case, It's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.